Welcome. Today we are going to be talking about 12 mistakes you might be making with intermittent fasting. I've been teaching and talking about intermittent fasting for years now, and it's really just blown up in the last 5 years because it is such a potent strategy to reverse insulin resistance and lose weight, reverse diabetes or type 2 diabetes, I should say. Reverse fatty liver, reverse PCOS, but there is no one size fits all approach. And sometimes people see what their friends or family are doing, or I give one person a protocol and the next person thinks they should do the exact same thing, and that's not always the case. I definitely will recommend certain protocols with certain goals, or if people are wanting to lose weight, or if they do have a more advanced disease process, I will kind of recommend guidelines along the same line, but they're not always the same. And they vary from person to person because we are all our own person. We all have our own goals, our own unique health history, and we need to take that into consideration. Now, if you're listening to this episode on the podcast on Fast to Heal Stories, I encourage you to share it with a friend or a loved one or a family member who you know is struggling with insulin resistance or any of the things that I'm talking about. Or maybe you know somebody who's doing some fasting protocols, but they're giving up on it because they don't think it works. They gave it a shot for a month and not seeing the results that they want, and just about to throw the towel in. So pass this along. I'm just one insulin resistant reversal expert trying to get the message out there. And if you've gone through my programs or you've worked with me and you've had success, please pass along the episodes or the website, whatever it is, because people deserve to know this information. It is buried a lot of times by the powers that be, by big food. Big food doesn't want people fasting. Obviously, it doesn't do them any favors for people to eat less and to eat less processed foods. So, there's a lot of systems at play that are trying to bury the information that I teach that actually help people to get well and thrive, because healthy people don't make institutions much money. So I'm going to get off my soapbox, but just keep that in mind. All you need to do is copy the link of whatever platform that you are listening to. Hit the little button in the corner, copy the link, pass it to a friend. You've done your job. Whether or not they listen to it, it's on them. Who knows? But if you send this to someone you love who you know is struggling, if they've never heard this information before, it might just put that light bulb off in their head, and they will turn their health around. Sometimes we forward things to people and they're just not ready. They're not ready to make changes. They're not ready to listen, but you just don't know where someone's at. So I encourage you to pass the information along, the episodes along. This is a really good one to pass along because it has to do with intermittent fasting, mistakes people are making, and why they're getting frustrated. And if you're watching this on YouTube, same thing. You can highlight and copy and paste the link. That would be wonderful. Let's get more people listening to this podcast so they can feel great too. None of these things that I teach are secrets. It's not like I came up with them on my own, but I put strategies in place and a step-by-step system in all of my courses so that people can learn what properly actually helps to manage their metabolic disease and turn it around and get healthy and stay that way forever. That is the difference between a low insulin lifestyle and getting metabolically well, and just doing some weird fad diet or, something that you just do for a few weeks, drop a few pounds, and then you're right back where you were before, or probably even more unhealthy. So Anyway, let's get to what we want to cover in this episode. So I'm going to be talking about 12 mistakes people make with intermittent fasting, and then 3 kind of questionable mistakes that may or may not be coming into play for you. Now, keep in mind, again, this isn't going to pertain to every single person listening. But if you have kind of hit a wall, you've been intermittent fasting for a while, maybe you had a lot of success at first and now you're just kind of at a stall. Or I have a lot of people come to me, especially with personalized protocols, and they did intermittent fasting for a year or two, had a heck of a lot of success and rocked it. For some reason or other, stopped the lifestyle, went back to their old habits, got unhealthy again, got, gained weight back, got, some poor labs, kind of back into their disease state. And now they're coming back to intermittent fasting and it's just not working the same as it did initially. And I do have a lot of students who struggle with that scenario. So listen to these intermittent fasting mistakes, and maybe there's just a couple of things that will really key in for you. And like I said, just kind of put that light bulb off and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So the first 5 things we're going to talk about have to do with nutrition and overall food intake and what you're doing in that quote unquote eating window. Once you break your fast, what you're doing until you then stop eating for the day or stop eating for a couple of days, several days, whatever kind of fasting protocol you are following. But number 1 would be eating too many carbohydrates. And in all of my programs, I address not only intermittent fasting protocols, therapeutic fasting protocols, but I also address therapeutic carb restriction. There are tons of episodes regarding this topic, but I do not teach no carb. I don't even have everybody go into the ketogenic way of, or bring carbohydrates down so far as that you're in a ketogenic state all the time. I teach low carb, and for most people, they are going to feel really well and do really well and reverse their disease process somewhere between 25 to 100 grams of carbohydrate daily, somewhere in there. Again, these are not like magic numbers where you absolutely have to be under 100 all the time, or you have to be over 25 every single day in order to see progress. But for the most part, most people will do well somewhere in that area. And I do have a carb quiz. If you haven't taken it, it's just a quick 7-question quiz that will really help you decipher where to start with carbohydrates. You can go to fasttoheal.info/carb quiz. And it's just right there, 7 questions. Takes you less than a minute to do, and then I will give you your results. But if we're eating too many carbohydrates, carbohydrates are what spike blood sugar and insulin the most out of all other foods. So if we're eating really high levels of carbohydrates, not burning them off, or we're very inefficient metabolically, we have some sort of metabolic disease, which let's face it, 8 to 9 out of 10 American adults have some form of metabolic disease. We are not going to process those carbohydrates well at all. And so if we have too many, they are not used efficiently. You can only store so much carbohydrate in the body. After that, it's converted to body fat. Your body starts to stuff it in your organs, stuff it in, all over the body, and you become fat. So we really need to key in and make sure we're not eating too much carbohydrate. And when we do choose carbohydrate, we want to choose non-starchy vegetables the vast majority of the time that have a good amount of fiber to buffer any blood sugar responses. So again, I'm not no carb. You don't have to worry like, oh my gosh, if I do Shanna's program, I'm never going to be able to eat carbohydrates again. Like, that is not my goal for you. My goal is to teach you a level of carbohydrate that feels right for your body, and then really key in on the type of carbohydrates that are going to serve your body well and contain fiber so that you don't get a big blood sugar response from the carbohydrates that you are eating. And then, of course, I'm not going to go over food order in this podcast episode or in this YouTube video, but food order plays a huge role with blood sugar spikes as well. And I do have a masterclass about that you can check out at fast2heal.info/blood sugar masterclass. And that will help tremendously if you're having trouble with blood sugar regulation. The second thing is too much protein. Yes, I did say too much protein. Now, I teach my students to hit their protein targets as much as possible, especially women. I don't think that this happens a lot of the time, especially for women, but if you are eating a ton of protein, protein does stimulate insulin second to carbohydrates, especially if you're eating proteins that are not natural, like say you're eating a protein powder or a protein bar where the protein it has been, like mashed down into a powder. That's going to be different than eating like an egg or 6 ounces of meat or whatever it is. So do take a look at your protein. I don't think that women go over protein very much, especially and actually, oh my gosh, spit it out, Shanna. But actually, I usually have people, women especially, under protein. But if you're taking in a ton of protein, you're eating a lot of protein bars, you're drinking a lot of protein shakes, that protein does stimulate an insulin response. So what I suggest is somewhere around 100 to 120 grams of protein for most women, and about 120 to 150 grams of protein for most men. So if you're taking in 200, 250, 300 grams of protein, that is a lot of protein. It's hard to overdo protein because you get so full, but it can be done. So just make sure you're not taking in too much protein because it can spike insulin and it can be converted to glucose in excessive forms in the process called gluconeogenesis. So that would be number 2. And number 3, of course, would be too much fat. It's like, oh my gosh, Shanna, like I can't have too much carb. I can't have too much protein. I can't have too much fat. No, I mean, you do want to get a good ratio of all of these macronutrients. You don't want to be too heavy on any one macronutrient, especially carbohydrates. But what can happen with fat, especially if you're following a ketogenic diet or you're trying to get yourself into ketosis and burn fat, is you can take in way too much fat. And again, gets difficult to do because fat is so satiating that you just don't want to eat as often. And your satiety centers are signaled that you're full, but it can happen if you're putting butter or MCT oil in your coffee all day long, or you're eating fat bombs, or you're taking in a tablespoon of coconut oil just to get some coconut oil in, or you're just going way overboard with your fats. And again, this can happen with the ketogenic diet because people just get it in their heads like, okay, I can eat all the fat that I want because I'm on a ketogenic diet, or I'm trying to increase my ketones. This is where people go wrong. And this is why this can fail you. And you can run into a weight loss roadblock or an intermittent fasting roadblock. Is you, just because you're in ketosis, you're burning ketones, maybe you have a ketone meter or whatever it is, and you're way into ketosis, but you're not losing weight. You're doing intermittent fasting, but it's failing you. Just because you're in ketosis doesn't mean that you're burning your own body fat. Okay, I want to say that again. Being in ketosis does not equal burning stored body fat. If you are eating way too much fat and then you're intermittent fasting 16 to 18 hours, but you're eating so much fat that you're constantly burning the fat in your bloodstream from the food, why would your body go and look for stored body fat if you are putting fat into your body all day? Maybe you're fasting with MCT oil or butter or whatever it is. You're doing a bulletproof fast all day. Your body's going to burn the fat that's in your bloodstream before it goes to look for stored body fat. So keep that in mind. That can get really frustrating. Like, okay, I'm really high into ketosis, but I'm not losing fat. Well, you're not burning your stored body fat. You're burning fat that you're eating all day. So keep that in mind too. That can be very, very frustrating with trying to incorporate intermittent fasting and not seeing results. So numbers 4 and 5 have to do with caloric intake. You're either eating way too many calories or you're eating too little calories. There's really a fine budget of calories that your body is happy with. So if we're eating too many calories, obviously we need to store those. We're not burning them off. They're not just going to poof disappear into the air. Now, what I teach, I don't teach counting calories all the time. I try to get people away from that and just focus on macronutrients and hormones, because when you do that, your calories are going to naturally, kind of balance themselves out. But if you eat way too many calories, and again, going back to that fat, example, like maybe we're just eating fat all day long. And even though we're not stimulating our insulin, we're still just eating way too much energy. Your body's got way too much energy to burn. Again, it's not going to go and look for stored energy. It's going to use the energy in the bloodstream first. So just make sure you're not eating way too many calories. Not that I want you to sit and count them, but you kind of know, it's like, okay, I might just be eating too much for what I need for my activity level. And then the other part of that would be too few calories. So too few calories, of course, is going to wreck our basal metabolic rate over the course of time. And so what do we even want to do while we're implementing intermittent fasting? Like, what are our goals? You need to keep that in mind. Like, our goals are to burn our own body fat, right? If we're overweight, we want to lose weight, we want to lose fat. We don't want to lose lean tissue. So our goal during our fast is to burn body fat, stored body fat, but maintain that basal metabolic rate, the amount of calories and energy that we're burning throughout the day. And we do that by keeping our muscle mass. And that is accomplished by, we can burn our fat by keeping our insulin levels down, but keeping our growth hormone up. So all of the things that I'm talking about helps you to do that. Like, that is our goal during a fast: burn body fat, keep our lean tissue, keep our growth hormone up, keep our basal metabolic rate. So if we eat too few calories, you can get away with that for a couple of weeks, couple of months. But if you are consistently doing that over the course of time, it's kind of like a light switch, a dimmer switch. You're just going to burn the body out for a while. It's like a thermostat. That was a better example. Like, if you just keep that thermostat too low for the body all the time, when you go back to having a higher thermostat, your body's going to store all that energy. So you want to be careful here. And this is why I don't suggest and recommend OMAD or one meal a day for most of my students. I recommend really just different fasting protocols day by day, doing different things, switching it up, and not doing OMAD, because it's really hard for you to get the amount of protein that you need and the amount of calories that you need consistently when you're just doing one meal a day every single day. It works for some. I'm not going to say it doesn't work for anybody, but it's not for a lot of people. Struggle with this for a weight loss protocol. They'll do really well for 3 to 6 months, and then they'll just kind of stall out because they're not eating enough calories and enough nutrition when they're eating. So then they lower their basal metabolic rate. So those are the first 5. They have to do with nutrition. You're eating too many carbs, you're eating too much protein, you're eating too much fat, or maybe you're eating too little protein. That can backfire on people too, because then you're not full. So you really want to hit that target as much as possible. And then having either way too many calories or too few calories, and you're lowering your basal metabolic rate. So number 6 would be going too low cal damaging that basal metabolic rate. And I want to talk a little bit about the difference between low calorie, calorie deprivation, and fasting. Like, how are they different? A lot of people ask me that. Well, doesn't fasting just work because it's calorie deprivation? And yes, typically when you are doing intermittent fasting or fasting protocols, you are lowering caloric intake, but you're doing it in a way that you're not lowering basal metabolic rate. So that is the main difference. Fasting for your body brings so many benefits. It raises growth hormone. That's what we want to preserve lean tissue. When your growth hormone levels rise, you preserve lean tissue. So you can look at the studies out there on fasting. With intermittent fasting and fasting protocols, very little lean tissue is actually lost during fast if you do it in a way that supports your body, because growth hormone will increase. And that's what we want. We want the growth hormone is protective to maintain lean tissue. So on the flip side of that, if we're calorically restricted, but we're eating many meals throughout the day, you don't give your growth hormone a chance to rise. Growth hormone rises in a fasted state. So if you're eating multiple times throughout the day, that growth hormone doesn't rise and you're just going to be calorie deprived. So it does come down to calories a little bit, definitely they matter. And I want you to think of like this example, like say we have a woman who is eating around 1,500 calories. And again, I'm not a big proponent of calorie counting, but I'm just using this as an example so you can see what I mean. So say a woman is eating about 1,500 calories a day. Woman one is eating 1,500 calories a day, but she is eating multiple times a day. So maybe she's eating that 1,500 calories 6, 7, 8 times over the course of the day, kind of that grazer, like snacky grazer. And her health expert told her, just stay under 1,500 calories a day and you'll lose weight. So she's just kind of a perpetual snacker all day long. The problem with this, she never gets full because she's never eating meals. Her insulin is constantly elevated and released. I mean, she's getting 7, 8 insulin responses during the course of the day. Insulin is never allowed to come low. So her calories are under what she would need for the day, but her insulin is high. This is problematic. This creates a problem because when insulin is high, you can't burn fat. So what does the body do? It's in storage mode. So it's taking those calories, even though it's only 1,500 calories, it's taking those calories. And because insulin is high, it's stuffing them and, stuffing them all over the body for the body to use at a later date. So it'll store carbs in the form of glycogen as much as possible. And then once glycogen stores are full, remember, you can only store a finite amount of carbohydrate. You need to convert that to body fat. So super frustrating. This woman's only eating 1,500 calories a day, but she's eating 6, 7, 8 times a day, stimulating her insulin all day long. Woman number 2 is also eating 1,500 calories, but she is only eating 2 meals. So she's eating 750 calories, or give or take, in the correct macronutrient profile twice a day. So her body's like, oh, nice. I'm nice and full. I got 750 calories. I stimulated my insulin once. I am nourished. I am good. I have this nice, big, nourishing meal that filled me up. And then you're full for 5, 6, 7 hours, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, kind of depending on the person. Insulin is allowed to come down. Then you eat one more time, stimulate insulin just one more time. You have a nice meal again, fill yourself up. Your body says, cool, I'm getting enough calories. Like I go long periods of time without eating. I kind of don't like that. But then when I do eat, I get enough food. So I'm all good. So the hormones start to regulate themselves, and insulin is only secreted once or twice a day, maybe 3 times instead of 8 times. So the low levels of insulin that are coming into play allow your body to burn body fat. So you're in a little bit of a calorie deprivation, but your body says it's nourished. And then you are going long periods of time, lowering insulin, and you're able to burn body fat. So that is the difference between calorie deprivation and fasting. Okay. So you're taking in the same nutrients, the same calories, but you're doing it in completely different ways and you have completely different hormonal responses. So that is why I teach intermittent fasting and how it differs from caloric restriction. So, my point is getting back to mistakes that you can make during intermittent fasting is, if you have an 8-hour eating window, but you're eating constantly, like every hour during that 8 hours and stimulating insulin 8 times, that is problematic. Or if you're drinking sugary drinks or you're drinking coffee with creamer or butter, or maybe not butter because butter doesn't really stimulate an insulin response, but you're drinking or eating something that's just spiking your insulin level 8 times during your eating window, that's going to become a problem most likely. Okay, so that is number 6. Number 7 would be eating or not drinking enough water and not getting electrolytes. So that can, you need water and good hydration for so many systems to run correctly and efficiently in the body. And that has to, energy production, you need water, you need electrolytes as well. So if you don't get the minerals that you need, your body can't use them. They're catalysts for all kinds of reactions in the body. So you need to have good enzyme intake in order to be successful in the long run. So I will put a link in the show notes for Element, is one of my favorite electrolyte brands. And you can click the link in the show notes for Element. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but it'll be in the show notes, and you can get a free sample pack of Element, 12 different flavors to try. You have nothing to lose. And if you don't like it, give it away to a friend, but you can get a free sample pack using the link in the show notes. And those are really great electrolyte mixes. Some of them do have stevia in them, so I only use them with my meals, but those are a wonderful way to get electrolytes. So make sure you're staying hydrated. And just because you're drinking a lot of water doesn't mean that you are staying hydrated. You need those minerals, those electrolytes, in order to hold the water in your body rather than just urinate it all out. So add some electrolytes, or add some pickle juice, or just put a good amount, some good sea salt or Redmond's real salt under your tongue while you're fasting, but that might help too. And then number 8 would be allowing yourself to just get way too hungry and you get to the point where you're going to overeat or binge. And this happens more so at the beginning when you're just getting used to the lifestyle and you're not used to going long periods of time without eating. You're not fat adapted yet. That is the problem. So if you're just coming off more of a standard American diet, a higher carb diet, and you're having trouble, like maybe you're like, okay, I'm not going to eat till noon, but you're so hungry by noon that you are just out of control and you're in your pantry and binging on everything. And then you're defeating the purpose of your fast. Take a look at what you can do to turn that around. You could have an earlier eating window, or, break your fast at 9 or 10. There is nothing wrong with that. And there is a lot of research that shows having an earlier eating window when you're more insulin sensitive and sensitive to carbohydrates, that can be wonderful and a wonderful approach. Cut your eating window off by 3 or 4. Don't eat dinner every day. Fast through dinner instead. That is a wonderful way to help with that binging, because you're not going to do yourself any favors if you're, white knuckling it through your fast until 1 or 2 o'clock. And then you're eating so much food that your body is completely overwhelmed. You're eating really terrible nutrition and you're putting in all of these toxic foods like snack foods or whatever it is because you're so freaking hungry that's not going to be helpful. So move your eating window earlier until you get better fat adapted. Then once you bring your insulin levels down some, you start to implement this lifestyle, it'll be a lot easier to get to do longer fasts. I was like this. I mean, I remember like, oh my gosh, I am going to eat everything and everything, anything and everything. And again, that master class that I have will really help with not setting yourself up for binging. But don't let yourself get too hungry, especially at the beginning. If this is new to you, there is no shame in fasting for 14 or 15 hours when your goal was 17 or 18 hours. It doesn't matter. Cut your window off earlier in the day, see if that is helpful for you, and, get away from that whole binging mentality. And then 9 would be just not getting any exercise or activity. So again, remember, our goals are to burn fat, maintain our basal metabolic rate, and keep our lean tissue. One of the best ways to do that is strength training. So we want to try to incorporate strength training into our lifestyle as much as we can. So I do 2 to 3 days a week of strength training. I exercise every day, whether it's a walk, a half an hour walk is exercise. You don't need to go and do an hour of prolonged exercise at the gym. Like, you can do a nice nature walk and call it good. But I do encourage you to do strength training. And then if you are going to do some higher intensity interval training, like HIIT or something higher intensity, don't do it for a really extended period of time. Okay. Do it for short bursts of time. That's, humans aren't really geared to do high intensity activity for a really long time. Like, that's not really how our bodies are set up, but short intervals are great. You can, just make your body adapt to that higher level of cardiovascular activity. But if you do it for too long, your body kind of shifts from burning mainly fat to burning more carbohydrate when you're doing those really high levels of activity, strenuous activity. So if you're doing the high interval training, the high intensity training, running, sprints, just keep them short. And then add some strength training in when possible. That is going to help. So that helps to preserve your lean tissue. It helps to build lean tissue. But remember, where we store glycogen, or where we store our carbohydrates, is in the liver and the muscle tissue. It's like little buckets all over your body. So you're constantly filling and emptying these buckets of energy. So the more muscle mass you have, the more strength training that you do, the more you're going to empty those buckets. And then, so when you eat carbohydrate and when you eat food, you have more area. You have area to store that glycogen. So if you're not eating a lot of carbohydrate all the time, you have area to store carbohydrate. If you're maxing out your level of carbohydrate and you're just eating too much sugar, too much processed foods, way too many carbs, even if they're whole grain carbs, you're maxing out that glycogen storage all the time. And once that's maxed out, you have to convert that energy to body fat. Okay. So that's why we keep carbs low. We're going to focus on strength training. We're not going to fill those buckets up all the time. All right, that would be number 9. Number 10 would be stress. So this goes along with, over exercising can increase stress. Again, humans were not set up to deal with chronic, everyday, prolonged periods of stress. We were set up to kind of, like run from, we always hear this example, but run from that saber-toothed tiger or bear for a short amount of time and then recover from it. It wasn't supposed to be like, oh my gosh, I'm running from this tiger all day, every day. Not like we have now. Like, the stress response was supposed to last like maybe a minute, and then we're done and we recover and we get our bodies out of that fight or flight, where now it's like prolonged chronic stress, stressful meetings, stressful relationships, running here or there, not getting outside in nature, not decompressing, constant high adrenaline that's never utilized. So when we're always producing adrenaline and cortisol, we're increasing blood sugar and insulin in our bodies. And if we're not exercising to get rid of that extra blood sugar and insulin, it's just going to sit there. Okay. So we want to keep our stress managed. And maybe you need to take a really hard look at this one and be like, my job, I don't know how much longer I can do this, or this relationship I'm in. I really don't know. Like, I don't know that I can heal my body if I'm in this amount of stressful environment day after day. So take a look at your stress. What can you do to manage it? What can you do to make that better? Because it's going to be really tough to intermittent fast when you have high levels of cortisol and higher levels of blood sugar and insulin, because it's hard to fast when you have higher levels of insulin. We know this. We know this when we start this whole lifestyle. It's like, oh my goodness, how am I going to even do a 12-hour fast? Because our insulin levels are so high. So that can wreck your intermittent fasting, or it can make it really tough to intermittent fast if you don't have your stress managed. Let's see. Number 11 would be sleep. Goes right along with stress. All right. Same thing. One night of sleep deprivation drives your cortisol up the whole next day by a lot. I can't remember the exact percentage, but if you are doing this night after night, your cortisol is higher. That's going to cause your body to release blood sugar, which is going to provoke an insulin response. So you don't sleep, you don't heal, you become less insulin sensitive. It's really that simple. You need to make sleep a priority. And if you're not sleeping well, you need to figure out why. Whole nother podcast, but go to bed earlier, get that phone screens out of your face for at least an hour before bed. Get some blue light blocking glasses if you need them. If you can't get off your screen until you go to bed, get some blue light blocking glasses. I will put a link in the show notes for a company called Bone Charge that sells really phenomenal blue light blocking glasses. I have an affiliate link for a discount. So look for that in the show notes. You can get yourself some really high quality blue light blocking glasses to help with your sleep. The other thing that really helps with sleep, and people think, well, this is all woo woo and what the heck is she talking about? But you need to reestablish your circadian rhythms if they are off. If you're staying up till all hours of the night, not getting good sleep, as soon as you get up in the morning, you need to get yourself out into the sunlight as quickly as you can for 10 minutes, if you can, without glasses or sunglasses on. Let that light get into your eyes. Your eyes will say, it's time to wake up. It filters that light to the brain. The brain says, it is morning. It is time to wake up. It is, you can reset your biological clock, your circadian rhythm. If you're having trouble sleeping, it takes a couple of weeks. But then when the sunset, go out into the sunset if you can. I know it's not always possible. I live in Wisconsin. I get it. But let those hues from the sunset get into your eyes. The pixels will send messages to the brain, time to sleep, and will start to increase melatonin. The morning light will increase cortisol. That's our wake up hormone. The nighttime sunset light will increase melatonin. That's our sleep. So it sounds funky and woo woo, like, oh my gosh, this lady's crazy, but that is how you start to reset your circadian rhythm and you sleep better. We have to get rid of all of these outside environmental lights and stimuli that is really disturbing our sleep quality. Hormones, women's hormones would be another thing. Again, whole nother podcast, but looking at, you might have really low levels of progesterone that are causing you to not sleep well. It might be too hot in your room. It might not be dark enough. All of those things factor in, but bottom line, get your sleep. All right. And then the last thing is that kind of what I alluded to earlier, is you're just doing the same protocol every day. You're doing the same amount of fasting. You're eating at the same exact time. You're eating the same exact amount of food. You're eating the same foods. Why would your body be forced to adapt to something new? Why would it allow itself to lose weight if you've been doing the same thing over and over? So if you were doing the same fasting protocol every single day, eating the same foods in the same amount, expecting different results, that's crazy. You need to switch up your protocol. And this is where I really help people with written protocols, my personalized protocols, because so many times they're like, I eat at 11, I stop at 5, blah, 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 like doing the same thing every day. It's like, nope, we got to add a 36-hour fast in there once a week. We have to fast for 20 hours once a week. We need to only fast for 14 or 16 hours a week and eat more a couple of times a day at different times. Like those are the things that are going to stimulate your body to have to adapt. And then in that adaptation process makes you stronger, and it can help you to move the needle with reversing disease and losing weight. So switching up that fasting protocol. And then I'm just going to talk about a few things that might be coming into play. They are a little bit questionable, but just something to think about if you've listened to the 12 things, like, okay, I'm doing all of that. Like, still, I don't know. I don't know, Shanna. Like, I'm still struggling. And all of those things that you said I'm already doing. So take a look at when you break your fast, how you're breaking it. I preach this a lot, but if you're taking in a lot of carbohydrate and a lot of fat when you break your fast, not enough protein, that's a lot of energy coming in. Our energy comes from either fat or carbohydrate. So are you taking that, too high levels of the energy, macronutrients in, and not enough protein? So, a lot of people will say, well, I'm more insulin sensitive coming off my fast, so that's when I'm going to take in a lot of carbohydrate. And this is true. But if you have diabetes or severe metabolic disease, fatty liver, you're not utilizing that energy as well as somebody who is more metabolically fit. So again, if you're taking in a high amount of fat, you should not be taking in a lot of carbohydrates. If you're taking in a high amount of carbohydrates, you should not be taking a lot of fat. This is where I really have people prioritize protein, because if you're prioritizing protein and keeping your carbohydrates managed, you're not going to be taking in high amounts of protein or high amounts of fat and carbohydrate together. So there's some controversy around this. You probably heard there's not a lot of foods in nature that are both high in carbs and high in fat, because it's just too much energy at one time. Those are all of our foods, like our processed foods. Like we look at French fries, very high in carbs, very high in fat. We look at pizza, high in carbs, high in fat. We look at ice cream, high in carbs, high in fat. All of these really processed foods that we crave, that we just love, they're really high in carbs and fat, and it makes it really easy to gain weight and spike insulin levels and store that fat. And we don't want to bring that all in at once. So the other thing would be sweeteners. And now I'm not talking about artificial sweeteners. I'm talking about alternative sweeteners like monk fruit or stevia or allulose or erythritol, some of the sugar alcohols. They're not going to likely produce a blood sugar response, right? There's not calories in them, but it's questionable whether or not you stimulate an insulin response. Now, even if you did, so there's a process called the cephalic response. I can never say that word right. Cephalic response, where when you eat something sweet, triggers your brain that there are calories coming, there's nutrition coming, there's food coming, and that the pancreas should secrete insulin, like in response to that sweetness. So whether or not that happens, it's really questionable. Does it happen? I don't know, because we can't really wear an insulin meter, right? We can watch our blood sugar, but we don't have insulin meters to say, yep, we had an insulin response. So there have been studies done with all alternative sweeteners. And of course, I'm going to tell you to stay away from artificial sweeteners. I don't think that those are, helpful for anybody, but alternative sweeteners, the ones that I've mentioned, are a different story. So the cephalic response is probably pretty minimal in people if you're going to have one. But here's how you can kind of decide or see if you've had an insulin response. with an alternative sweetener during your fasting window. So say you want to put some stevia drops in your coffee or your tea or whatever it is that you're having. And you like, I have no idea if I had an insulin response. There's a couple of things you can look for. You can look for physical signs. You can say, okay, after I have that stevia, it's really hard to fast. I am hungry. I got shaky. Those are signs that you produce an insulin response. If it's all of a sudden really hard to fast, or you got really hungry, or you got shaky, and you felt like you needed to eat, you probably had an insulin response. The other way you can do it is with a blood sugar meter. So if you're in a fasted state, you're not taking in calories or carbohydrate, right? So your blood sugar should stay pretty stable. So let's say it's morning time, you're in a fast, your blood sugar is right around 90. Maybe it bumps a couple points here and there. It goes from 88 to 90 to 92 and back down to 90, somewhere in that range. You haven't had like a stressful morning, because that can provoke blood sugar response. You haven't done a lot of exercise. You're just kind of watching, and you had some coffee and you put some stevia drops in there. What you can watch for is a dip in your blood sugar. So if you're at 90 and all of a sudden you had some stevia drops and then you dip down to 80 or 85, you likely had an insulin response, because what that insulin does is pushes energy and blood sugar into the cells. So now you've seen a drop in your blood sugar, you probably had an insulin response. So again, it's probably going to be that insulin response is probably going to be pretty minimal, even if you had one, because it's not like you're having any calories. But you can kind of say, okay, I was having some really good success. Now I'm not. I started to add stevia during my fasting time. Maybe I should take it out and just see, especially if you measured your blood sugar and you saw a dip after having some stevia. That would indicate you had an insulin response. Okay, so that's a little confusing. You might need to go back and listen to that again, but that can be something else that can be problematic for certain people. I wouldn't say everybody has problems with that. There's some people who can have stevia or erythritol or whatever in their fasting time and they do fine, and there are others who no, like they're going to stall progress. So that's really individual. And then the last thing I've talked about already, but this might be kind of iffy, is kind of that concept of bulletproof coffee or having bone broth during your fast. Like, I'm not one that, like, I don't like a lot of hard rules when it comes to people's fasting and eating. Like, it's really individual. So again, if you're one of these people who are, you're adding some butter into your coffee, or you're adding some bone broth mid-morning because it just helps you get through your fast. Like, if you add that butter, again, butter is not going to cause an insulin response, because pure fat does not cause an insulin response, or very, very little. But for the most part, we can just say, no, it's not going to cause an insulin response. It will break your fast, because anything above 10 or 15 calories is going to break your fast. But if your goal is to remain in a fasted state to remain fasting, like say you want to fast for another 4 to 6 hours, but you're struggling, and then you have some coffee with butter and you feel great, that's going to keep you in your fast for 4 to 6 hours. Great. Like, yeah, you had some calories, you technically broke your fast, but you didn't stimulate insulin. You didn't have a big meal and stimulate insulin a ton and, have all those calories and then, feel icky. Like, no, like, you had a little bit of bone broth, you had a little bit of butter in your coffee, you then fasted another 6 hours. That works for you. Okay. It might not work for the next person. Or if you're adding 4 pats of butter into your coffee twice, and now you're having 800 calories and 80 grams of fat, you're probably not going to lose weight with that. So you have to keep it all relative and think about what your goals are and what is getting you there. Your goals are to burn fat and keep your muscle tissue. Those are your ultimate goals during the intermittent fast. I mean, we have other goals. We want autophagy, we want longevity, we want to, try to decrease our risk for cancer, because cancer is a metabolic illness, and we want to just get our, our overall metabolic health better. But it's very individualized as well. So I hope that gives you a few things to think about, 12 things to think about, 3 things that are more questionable and personalized from person to person. But I hope this episode gets you thinking. Again, remember to share it with a friend. And if you're having trouble with these concepts and, just implementing them day after day, please enroll in Low Insulin Academy. That will give you all the tools that you need to learn all of this information, apply it, get your disease state put into remission for good. You can join the on-demand version, fasttoheal.info/Low Insulin Academy online, or you can put yourself on the wait list for the next live version, which will be September 2023. And that is fasttoheal.info/LIA waitlist. Would love to see you inside the program. I mean, you will learn what you need to learn to get your disease process reversed, put into remission, and stay into remission. So hope you learned a lot on this episode. I'll see you back next week for another episode.